My name is Amber Race, and I am going to, first I'll introduce myself a little bit. I am a senior SDET, that's a software developer engineer in test at Big Fish Games in Seattle, Washington, where I've worked for 10 whole years, which is pretty amazing. And before that, I worked at Microsoft. And let's get this show on the road. There we go. It worked. All right. So, my name is Amber, and I'd like to tell the story of how I started out in test, and then I became a developer, and then we'll see what happens next. Basically, as I said, I've been working in the industry for about 20 years now, and for 15 of those years, I've been working as a full-time coder. This is how I make my living, by writing words into a machine and making it do what I want to do, which is pretty great. So, anyway, before I get started on click. There we go. There we go. It worked. Okay. So before I get started on my story, I just want to talk about a trope that's it's becoming less and less, but it's still something that is around, which is that the tester is the sidekick. The developer is the star of the story, and the tester is there to help the developer get something done and getting it out into the world. And let's be real. I mean, if you're going to pick who to be, are you going to pick Batman? You're going to pick Robin? No, nobody wants to be Robin. What's Robin's job? Well, actually, originally in the comic books, Robin's job was to take this broody, nasty, kind of unrelatable guy that's Bruce Wayne / Batman and make him more relatable to the audience. So they threw in Robin, sort of a happy-go-lucky young guy that's the kids that were reading the comic books could relate to. Sort of like you have your kind of broody and unsociable developer, and the tester is coming along as an advocate for the user, and we're going to make their code relatable to the world. But the problem is that Robin doesn't have any superpowers. I mean, Batman doesn't have any superpowers either. He's just really wealthy, but at least he has that. Robin doesn't even have that. His job is to be captured by the bad guys, to get smacked around by Batman, and all sorts of other hijinks. And really, if you want to be yourself. But if you can be Batman, definitely be Batman. So that's sort of the traditional role of the tester. And now let's talk about a real superhero story, which is my origin story, right? So I started out as an Asian studies major. This is because I actually grew up in a household of computer geeks. My mother was a mainframe systems operator for many years before she retired. And my father was a hobbyist, and he put together computers. This would have been in the late 70s. We had a computer in our house that ran on a tape deck, if anybody's old enough to remember those. So I was very comfortable with computers, very accustomed to them, and my mother was like, yeah, you have a good head for math, and you like puzzles, you should consider computer programming. And because she was my mother, and I loved her, and she was such a wonderful role model, I immediately rejected that idea out of hand. So although I was very comfortable with computers, and the whole idea that women could do computers was so obvious that it didn't even need mentioning to me, because that's what my mom did my entire childhood, I ended up majoring in Asian studies, and I lived in Japan for several years, and I traveled all over the world. And it was pretty great, except when I came back to Seattle and tried to get a living, tried to get a job that utilized my language degree, it was maybe not so great. I ended up as a secretary in an export firm that was putting together paperwork for frozen French fries. So 50 containers a week of frozen French fries getting sent to Japan, and I was putting together the paperwork and all that really great office lady stuff, which, wasn't actually all that great. So at the time, this would have been the late 90s, Microsoft was hiring like mad, and I had a friend that had gotten a job as a contract tester, and I thought, what does it take to be a tester? I can use a computer. I'm smart. So I threw my resume in, and it just so happened that the handwriting recognition group at Microsoft was looking for somebody who was familiar with East Asian languages. So they wanted somebody who was familiar with East Asian languages, and they had a whole cadre of people whose job was to check all the data that they were collecting for their recognizer. So this is machine learning. It was a thing 20 years ago, just like it is now, and of course 20 years before that I think it was a thing as well. So they were collecting all this handwriting data. They needed people that could test that the data was being written correctly and tagged, and then they needed me to come in and sort of be the liaison between all these people and the developers. Kind of, a Robin type of role. But it was a lot better than being a French fry secretary. So I ended up at Microsoft, and I really enjoyed it. It was really great. And of course, it had been my plan all along. Yeah, I'll get a major in Asian Studies, and I'll go to work at Microsoft. So I'm working on this handwriting team, and we're working on this very, we have a bunch of PhDs that are putting together this neural network and training, and we couldn't train the neural network on our laptops at that point. We had to have a whole build lab for training and all that. And it was all very theoretical until somebody said, hey, we want to put this product into our new version of Windows CE. That's how old everything is, right? This is 1999, 2000. So all of a sudden now we had like a real handwriting product that was going to go out into the world. Like people were actually going to use this product. So of course it needed to be tested. So since testing doesn't need anybody can test, right? You can use a computer, poke around, that's what testers do. So they took all these people whose job it was to read and write their native language and told them, all you're testers now. So that was our job. We tested the product, and it was very typical to mobile testing now, except not as nice because it was on a Windows CE device. And it turns out that testing is actually quite difficult, much more difficult than reading and writing your native language. So out of the 16 of us that have been pressed into this testing job, only 3 of us survived after a few months. Thankfully, I was one of them. And it turned out that what I really enjoyed was not the activity of poking around on the product so much. There were other people in the group, some women, that were really quite gifted at picking up the device and finding all the weak areas. I have to say that's never really been my particular gift. Exploratory testing. Am I allowed to say manual testing? I'm going to say manual testing, as in testing with your hands instead of making a computer do the testing. So what I really liked was working with all the data that was coming in. So we had all this data that was being collected around the world in a special format, and it was tagged. And some of this data, they needed some of the data for testing and some of the data for training, just like machine learning now. It's all the same. And so I took it upon myself to create these batch scripts, and the developers very kindly taught me about sed and awk and grep and all that sort of good stuff. And I put it into a database. I taught myself SQL. So we had this database of all this ink data that was coming in. It was tagged with various languages, with male, female, age, what they'd written, all that sort of stuff. So that was my first programming language, was SQL. And it's definitely a programming language for sure. It's a little out of fashion now to write stored procedures, but I learned how to do that, and it turned out to be a really useful skill, and it still is today. And then I started, they have a very good education program at Microsoft, lots of programming classes. Once I went full-time, I was able to take a lot of the classes, and I learned C and C++ development, Visual Basic, whatever was going on in 2002. I don't remember exactly. So I started doing various tools development, and that really was something that I was very interested in. It turned out my mom was actually right, that I was pretty good at computer programming. And maybe if I'd taken her advice and graduated with a CS degree in 1992, I wouldn't be here today. I'd be on a yacht somewhere. But I didn't take her advice. Your mother's always right, but you usually don't find out until later. So so after a while, I left Microsoft, and I moved on to Big Fish Games. Yes, indeed. And when I started at Big Fish Games, I didn't even know the difference between a get and a post. They actually hired me because I knew SQL. That was one of the things that got me in. And of course, it's easy to learn the difference between a get and a post. And I learned all about web services and how to test them, API development, performance testing, kind of more of the stuff that if you know me, which you don't have to know me, but if you do, it's probably for that sort of thing, for web services. So that's my origin story as a testing superhero, so to speak. So just to do some highlights of my career, not just to brag, well, it's sort of to brag, but also to give an idea of the sort of stuff that I've been working on. So I created a tool for searching the handwriting database, for putting together testing and training sets. I made an ink-enabled boggled-style game for tablet PC. Does anybody remember the tablet PC? Anyway, it was before its time. So I made a little boggle game that you could do, and you could customize the tiles with your own handwriting. Or I made a demo application for the ink and handwriting analysis API that could test all the different APIs. When I was at Microsoft and Big Fish Games, we did a Facebook game. So I made a test game that worked on Facebook, and it was a very boring game, but it tested all of our APIs. And then we did a streaming product, and I put together these various log parsers and with jQuery and geolocation and all sorts of this and that, made this dashboard where we could drill in on different streaming sessions and see what was going on around the world, et cetera. So this isn't just to brag, it's sort of to show the kind of stuff that's possible when you're even in a tester's role. I thought that Trish's keynote the other day talking about how testers are sort of filling in the gaps. That's sort of what my career has been. I've seen something that we need in order to facilitate the product development, and I just sort of I create that thing, and I really enjoy that. So, because I don't find that I think of myself as a Robin person. I'm more of a Hermione than a Robin. If Hermione was a Hufflepuff, which I am a Hufflepuff pride. Okay. So. Hermione is not a sidekick at all. I mean, if anybody's the sidekick, Harry Potter is the sidekick. Let's be real, right? I mean, Hermione is out there. She sees what needs to be studied. She sees what people need to know, and she's going to the library, and she's looking it up, and she's sharing her knowledge, and she's making sure that everybody is on top of what's going on. And she is really passionate about magic and learning about it, and she's absolutely Harry Potter's equal, and he would have died in the first semester at Hogwarts if Hermione hadn't been there to save his butt so many times. So, yay for Hermione Granger. Robin's all right, but I'd just rather be Hermione. Yeah. Of Hermione? Yes. Oh. Okay. So anyway, I had pretty much established myself at Big Fish, testing services, but it was time for a new challenge. So that came along in the version of a new feature. So we have a game. It's still out there, actually. It's a game. It's a match 3 game similar to other match 3 games you've heard of, where you put 3 together and it explodes and et cetera, et cetera. Very typical sort of thing. Well, it's a popular game, and it had a feature where you could send gifts to your friends via Facebook. So if you've ever received a request via Facebook that you've immediately ignored and blocked all requests from Facebook, that's basically how this request went. And so we didn't want to go through Facebook anymore because nobody pays any attention to their Facebook requests. And also, when you go through Facebook, that means that Facebook gets your data and we don't. So we had a microservices framework. I love this GIF. This pretty much sums up microservices as far as I'm concerned. So we were building our own microservices framework, and we kind of had taken this "if we build it, they will come" attitude, and game teams didn't want to do that for some reason. They didn't want to stop doing the stuff they knew worked and start doing our stuff. So what we decided to do, we would have this feature that would go into this popular game, so that people would give gifts via our services instead of via Facebook. And then not only would we have all the data, but it would be a proof of concept, so then all the other games would come in and use our microservices, et cetera. That was the plan. So I was very familiar with these services because I had been involved in the development and testing of them. And I sort of put together a proof of concept. It's like, well, yeah, sure, if we take this service and that service, and we put it together, we could definitely do a gift. And I demonstrated in front of upper management how we could send a gift via our services, and everybody was like, yes, Amber, that's great. You get to develop this service now. Thank you. So, all right. I mean, I knew C#. It was a Xamarin product, and we were using C#, which I had used at Microsoft. So, and of course, I was already a developer, so it wasn't like a huge step to say, it's not like somebody came with a tiara and said, Amber, you're a developer now. It sort of seemed like a natural evolution from what I'd been doing. So I became a developer of this particular feature. And now I need a glass of water. So, and when I became a developer, the way it worked is, so I was developing this feature, and I began to understand how it was that features come to test the way they do, with very obvious bugs in them. So have you ever gotten something, you've gotten a build, and they say, here you go, it works, and you sort of do something and it breaks immediately, and you're like, what? Why are you sending this to me when it's so obviously broken? Well, once I became a developer, I found out why that happens. So, so the things I was able to do as a developer, I was able to write unit and integration tests. Even I, as a fresh-faced junior developer, 15 years into my career, was able to write unit and integration tests at the service level. So I was doing the whole shebang, very agile, the whole sliver of the product, or Scrum, or whatever that is. So I did the database and the server, and I was able to do unit and integration testing for the service level, but for the client level, I was wedging this feature into this code base that was already 2 years old, that was handled mostly by a bunch of engineers in Vladivostok, and did not have any unit testing framework within it, because Xamarin really wasn't up to the task of asynchronous unit tests, and I most certainly was not up to the task of figuring out how to do asynchronous unit tests while developing this feature. So I did not do unit tests at the client level, but I did do builds and make sure that it worked the way I expected it to work. So I did that. And most importantly, I was able to put in testability hooks. So this is something like if you have a feature where when you run out of lives, you can ask your friend for another life. Instead of having the developers poke around and lose 5 times and lose all their lives, you just have a debug menu with a button that says, dump all my lives, that sort of thing. These sort of hooks is very easy to put in and very helpful for test. And certainly, if you're doing a product and there's some sort of shortcut that would make your life easier, it's absolutely fine. I would expect any developer would be able to put in these hooks for you to make your life easier. Because this is not like developer versus test, right? We all know that developers actually do care about shipping good product, right? Because it's their code that's out there. They taking pride in their product. We all want to work together to make good code. So if you're saying, hey, it would really help me if I had this particular function in there, most developers are going to be like, yeah, absolutely, I'll put it in, and it'll make everything easier. It'll make my poking around easier, too. So that's what I was able to do as a developer. Not so doable. I should clarify that it's not that developers can't do these things, it's that they can't do them at the same time that they're developing, right? So when I'm developing a product, when I'm developing a certain part of the feature, my concentration is getting that to work. That's all I'm thinking about. How do I get this to work? I'm not thinking about what happens if the person has, 1 life left, and then the battery runs out, and they go into airplane mode, and then they turn it back on, and a gift comes in. I don't know. I don't know what happens when that's the tester's job to figure that out, or somebody with a testing mindset. If you're talking about a mindset, I mean, one person can have a development and a testing mindset, but not at the same time. So what I was not able to do was think of complex scenarios, all these edge cases, how it's going to integrate with different parts of the application. I found that part was, in-depth user analysis. How are the users going to be actually experiencing this product? It's sort of like, well, I have my prototype and I'm wedging it into the game. I'm not necessarily thinking about, is this the best way to wedge it into the game? I'm thinking about, I need to get this to work, and now it works. I'm done, right? Because let's think about what happens in development. You have a happy path, right? So I'm typing along. Woo. My path is very happy at this point, especially when I get it to work. So I'm trying to get it to work, but then it turns out, oh, well, there's multiple entry points. I have a button I can push to ask a friend for a life, or I'm prompted at the end of a level to ask a friend for a life, or when I run out of lives, so there's, then I have to put in these different wirings to get it all to work there. And then it turns out that we have this client had it this way, and then we have a new release that's that way, but your friend might still be doing it this other way, so you have to be able to handle both ways. So that has to be put in. And then we're doing it in 5 languages, so we have to make sure that all the strings are available for all the languages and that they're fitting into the boxes correctly. And then, oh yeah, of course, Android versus iOS, and if you have a push notification, that's different code for Android versus iOS. If you're having some kind of background task management, that's also different, so you have to be developing in both those sorts of things. And then, There. UI changes. It turns out that this UI is not what we're going to do, so we're going to change it this way. And then we have to have monitoring on the surfaces so that we know what's going on. So I got to put that. So now I got to put the Xamarin stuff away and go back to the service and put in the different things and make sure it's working. And then we have to make sure that the server is going to perform properly. So making sure that's happening. And then there's a feature creep. It's like, well, now we want to also give not just lives, but these other things. And can you put that in? Oh, sure, no problem. It's not I'll just stick that in because in my copious free time. And security. This is an interesting one. I spent several days putting together a security saying, hey, we don't have to pass around these GIFs as pure JSON that anybody could hack. We could do some kind of JSON web token thing. And I spent several days showing how that could be done. And they were like, nah, we'll do that after it releases. As far as I know, it still hasn't been done. But the attitude is like, if people care enough about our game to hack it, that means we're a success. And so we'll worry about it when that time comes. So there's security issues, and then, of course, there's bug fixing. So this is all of the stuff that I'm having to sort of keep in my brain while I'm doing the testing, while I'm doing the development. And so that makes it very difficult for me to then say, oh, and then there's all these other things. And of course, I only have one brain. That's the other problem. So I'm thinking of things in a certain way, and I'm trying to, make sure that it works, but it really takes another brain to come in and find the different issues. So we did our first release, and, it went okay, except that the users really didn't know what was going on, and they complained to customer service. So we took it back. Yeah, our very lovely customers, not the enemy. They sort of saw this thing that I had wedged in based on a demo that I'd done 6 months before, and the customers were like, what, what is going on? So we turned off the feature flagging, very important feature. So back to the drawing board. Now all of a sudden, the product owners woke up and said, oh yeah, I guess we also need to be involved in this and figure out how we want our users to interact with the inbox. So there was a complete redesign that was done, and we did a second release. And we completely redesigned the inbox so that it made sense to what was going on, and people knew who was giving them what gifts, and the initial launch was a success. People were using it. They were giving gifts to each other. I could look at the monitoring graphs and see, woo, people are using my code, yay. And we didn't get complaints from customer service, which was good. There were a few whispers of something odd going on, but whatever. Everything was fine. Until we're in a meeting a couple weeks, maybe a week after it launched, and one of the executives says, you know what? We're seeing a little softness in the numbers. You know how somebody says something in a meeting and everybody goes like that? That was sort of like, oh my God. Because what we were doing, what we sell in this game is lives. That's what people buy. And what people were giving to each other was lives. And something had happened with this feature where people were not buying as many lives as they were before. And since mobile games are based on, a 5% of people that playing the game actually spending money on it. When there's little changes like this, people get very worried. So now we had a real problem. But it was also an opportunity, because now I got to not be a developer anymore. I got to sort of bust out of the phone booth, Clark Kent style, say, all right, let's figure out what's going on with this problem. What is happening with the lives? So Supergirl style, I come out and I get to be a tester again. And I started looking through the database, and it turned out that certain people had like hundreds of in-game friends. That was the first surprise. Some people are really into these games, and they make a lot of in-game friends. And people had thousands and thousands of lives, like more lives than they could use in their actual lifetime. So was it a security issue? Was there, some sort of cheat going on? And I made a very beautiful query in SQL, my first love, SQL. I wish I could share the query with you, but I haven't passed this through legal, so I'm not going to share the query. But believe me, it was a really nice query. And I found what the culprit was. The culprit was me. It was my own code that was broken. If you'll recall, I had people testing on the client level. I had a dedicated tester that helped me with the game itself. But as far as the service level, it's sort of like, oh, well, I have the UI and integration tests. Developers can test the code, and it's fine. Well, I'd missed a scenario. What had happened was that somehow when people were giving a gift to their friend, I decided very generously that they could give a gift to all their friends. So anytime you gave a gift to your friend, all your friends got the gift. Because I had tested if it goes from A to B, B gets it, but I hadn't made sure that C didn't get it. So that was the scenario I missed. If anybody's done gifting testing, you've probably come across these similar missed scenarios. So I did put in a test for that. But yeah, after all of that, it was my own code that was broken. So yay, I was the hero. I found it, and we pushed out a fix, and everybody was so happy. Oh, Amber, that's so great that you found the fix. It's like, well, yeah, I mean, yeah. So happy ending. The feature is still being used. This was nearly 3 years ago that I started the prototype of this feature, and I asked about it, and they're still using it. So that kind of gives me a warm, happy glow. This is what developers like, right? It's like I put this out into the world, and people are using it 3 years later, thousands of players every day. And I learned a lot. Yeah? A full stack developer. That's going on my resume for sure. I did the database all the way up. I even did some UI mockups to show what things could look like. Not that people kept my UI, because I can do testing and I can do development, but I cannot do design. That is out of my league. And of course, I learned a lot about how development works and how I could be a more helpful tester for developers. So normally in the story, this would be where I would graduate. It's like, I don't have to be Robin anymore. Now I can be Batman. And I'm sure we all know a lot of people that have done that have moved from test into development. But I didn't actually want to do that. I actually liked being a tester. Because when you're a tester, you sort of get to see everything that's going on. You get to have a holistic view of the product. Whereas when you're developing a feature, I was like, all I could think about was, how do I get this gift from this device to that device? And also, when I was sort of doing my tools development, I see a problem and I fix it, and I get to decide how to fix it. And it was very creative. Whereas feature development is sort of like, okay, here's what we're doing, and here's what it's going to look like. So make it happen. Make it so. So I didn't get to be Picard. I got to be number 1, 2, whatever his name was. Help me out here, Dan. Anyway, there. Okay. So developers are often very constrained by the requirements, especially if you're coming into a product that already exists. Whereas test-focused development, I found it to be very creative and more fulfilling for me. So basically what it came down to is when I was a developer, I felt like this. There's a problem here, and problem there, and I kind of make it all work. But when I'm testing, I feel like this. You know, I'm out there on the savannah, I'm looking at the herd, picking out the weak ones for dinner. But it makes the herd stronger. So it's a service I'm providing to make the herd stronger, right? So that's when you are looking at your own test role, instead of, I hope that you're not thinking of it as something that's sort of junior to development, but sort of working alongside it as a Hermione, a lioness Hermione. Yes, that's what I'm going to be. That's my talk about my harrowing journey. And if there's any questions, please feel free to ask me. Thank you. Yeah. Oh, and I think this is going to be replayed in the afternoon. So tell all your friends. Yes. Yes, Dan. Oh.
I'll project. It's fine.
Yeah.
So your journey through this is through the context, as I see it, of being a woman inside a predominantly male organisation, but also with skills that are largely
Right.
not necessarily brought around or focused on by things like gender and stuff
Yeah.
like that. And you haven't really dwelled on that, but the superhero models that you show generally seem to be very gendered, right? When we recruit people, develop people in terms of that, do you think
So
it's your story, but
right. Okay. So if people couldn't hear, the question was like, I didn't talk about how my being female worked into this, or with the yes, we hear like we got this rock star superhero, zip zap, and this is sort of kind of a gendered thing. My own personal story, I like, because of my upbringing, with my mother being very technical, and all that, it was not something that I felt I was overcoming anything to go into the technical thing. It was sort of like biology was becoming true by going into the technical thing, as far as my viewpoint. Although I was the very first woman hired into this group at Microsoft, they were a little concerned. They were a little concerned that I would not be able to put up with their swearing, but it turned out all right. So for my own personal journey, I don't feel like it's been affected much by my gender, thankfully, for my own experience. Although I do like the fact that Hermione is such a great character, and she's female, and she kicks Harry's and Ron's ass all over the place. I mean, so it's so yeah. Anyway, any other questions?
We're out of time, so if you have any more questions, feel free to approach Amber at the break, afterwards, in the open space. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.